Okay, I have a question for you. Do you know what your go-to phrase is when you're about to overdo something or when you're about to tip the scales towards a habit or activity that will lead you towards burnout? Do you know what your phrase is? Because I have a theory, and that theory is that everybody has a phrase. And once you have identified it, you can listen for it and you're going to be better able to stop yourself before you go too far. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Wellness Simplified podcast. Simple wellness tips to help you improve your life without turning it upside down. With your host, award-winning fitness instructor, nutrition coach, and wellness expert, Susie Fevens.
This is something I've only come to realize about myself in the past year or so. Almost the last 18 months, I don't know. Sometime at the beginning of the pandemic, I realized this about myself, and I have caught myself countless times since making the realization. And just as I said in the intro, my theory is that we all have a phrase, or maybe it's not a phrase, maybe it's just something that we do just before we're going to tip the scales into burnout or go into the overdoing it. Because my name is Susie and I am an overdo it. I had a theory, I still sort of have the theory that there's nothing worth doing unless you're going to overdo it. And if you have been to any of my themed Monday night classes or watched my reels or anything like that, you will know that I have a penchant for overdoing things in the name of entertainment, even though they make me feel like a complete goofball. But that aside, I noticed this one particular phrase that never, ever came out of my mouth except when I was about to push myself to do something when I was already tired or exhausted or maxed out, and I was just going to make myself do it anyway. And that phrase for me is, I'm just going to crank out blank. A lot of the times it's just like, I'm just going to go and I'm going to crank out these 3 fitness classes, get them recorded, get them off my list. I don't have to do them. I'm just going to go crank out this laundry. I'm going to go crank out whatever it is. As soon as I hear myself say the words, I'm going to crank out being the words, I know I need to just stop. And very, very recently, I caught myself saying, I'm just going to go crank. And then I said, no, I need to go sit down. Because I know that that is a phrase that I only use when I'm about to push myself further than I need to, further than I should. Crank it out. It's not an odd term. It's just not one that I otherwise would use. And it can be not necessarily just for physical things. Like I could say, I want to go crank out these podcasts. I'm going to go crank out a blog post. I'm going to go crank out anything. You can crank it out. Just visualize that for a second, cranking it out like someone laboring, trying to crank this rusty crank. No, I need to go sit down. And I truly, truly believe that we all have a phrase or a telltale sign before we push ourselves into that state of burnout, that state of overdoing, that state of perpetual motion. And as soon as we can figure out what that is, you still have that desire to quote unquote crank out things. But when you can catch yourself and say, okay, now does this thing truly need to be done right now? Occasionally the answer is going to be yes. Occasionally you are going to have to do the thing. But most times we can sort of reformat or reschedule ourselves so that we don't have to crank out the thing when we are overtired. So this one is a little bit more challenging because I don't think that most people are necessarily aware of those tendencies until they start looking for them. So while I do not wish for you to be in a place where you are about to overdo it or you're about to kind of crest that mountain into burnout. I wanted to have this conversation because hopefully the next time you do find yourself going towards that, this will kind of come back to you, and maybe it won't be until it's a little bit too late. Maybe you'll say the crank it out and start to crank it out, and then realize what you've done and say, oh, maybe that's the thing I do. Maybe that's the thing I say or the thing I do when I'm about to overdo it. This is definitely an issue of self-awareness. And I wish so much that I could just reach through your speaker, wherever you're listening to this, and say, your phrase is blank, and just demystify that for you. But I can't do that. All I can do is tell you my experience, what my phrase is, and how that understanding has helped me differentiate between times when I'm just pushing myself a little bit, maybe going into the overdoing, but in a safe overdoing, because there's definitely a difference between overdoing something in a way that is not going to cause you mental, physical, emotional burnout. And then there's overdoing it that is going to cause you mental or physical or emotional burnout. And burnout really encompasses all those things. But anyway, so you can overdo things. A chronic overdoer like me can overdo things as long as they have the space and the capacity to do that. But when I start saying crank it out, I do not have the capacity. That is a capacity issue for me. The phrase crank it out means my capacity is too low. And as much as I'd like to go do that, I need to go sit down. I need to adjust some things. I need to create some more space so that I can increase my capacity by decreasing my workload for a few days, which for someone who is a very go-go can be really challenging. But honestly, I can't tell you how helpful it has been for me to recognize that terminology that I use when I'm about to cross that line. Because I hear myself say it and I think, haven't we addressed this? Like, have I not passed this point where I'm still falling into this same trap? And clearly I'm not. But the difference now is I recognize it, whereas before I just did it. And that is my wish for you, is the ability to recognize when you're about to cross that line. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully, like I said earlier, this can kind of bubble and brew in the back of your brain. And the next time you're about to overdo it or push yourself further than you should, maybe you'll recognize that thing that you do, whether it's a phrase or an action, just before you overdo it. You may not recognize it until after you've done it. And that's okay too, because it's all a learning experience. But I truly believe we all have a thing. And when we figure it out, it's really going to help you. It's really going to help you. So I hope you found this interesting. If you do want to know what your phrase or your thing is, I would love to hear it. I would love to have some other examples for my toolbox for when I'm consulting with clients and they're trying to figure out their thing. So if you know what yours is, send me a message, info@susiefevens.ca, or on Instagram @SusieConfesses. Links are going to be in the description. If you don't know where to find me, you can do that there. I would love to hear what your thing is, if you know what it is, or if you suspect you know what it is. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Don't go cranking anything out. Don't do it. And I will talk to you next week.